The hand that reached for Evelyn Moretti never touched her, and in that room, that was the first mistake anyone noticed. 20 minutes earlier, the rain had been sliding down the tall windows of the Moretti estate like silver threads, blurring the lights of Fifth Avenue into something softer, colder, almost unreal. Inside, everything breathed old money. Crystal glasses, polished walnut, candlelight reflected across marble floors that looked untouched by time. Guests spoke in low voices, careful voices, the kind people used when power was present even before the man himself arrived. Vincent Moretti was still away, delayed somewhere downtown, but his name already filled the house like perfume too expensive to ignore. At the center of that quiet gravity stood his mother, Evelyn, elegant in midnight silk, one gloved hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, as if dignity itself had taken human form. And moving around her, nearly invisible, was Claire Whitmore, the maid no one remembered hiring and no one ever seemed to notice twice. She carried a silver tray with steady hands, eyes lowered just enough to seem harmless, yet somehow she saw everything. The stranger near the bar, the smile that arrived too late, the tension hiding beneath polished manners. By the time the room understood danger had entered, Claire already had. Claire did not move quickly. That was what made people remember the moment wrong later. They would say she appeared out of nowhere, but she had been there the whole time, standing 3 feet away with a linen napkin folded over one arm, watching the room through the reflection in a glass cabinet no one else had bothered to notice. Her hand rose with quiet precision and stopped the woman's wrist in midair, not with force, not with spectacle, but with the calm certainty of someone closing a door before the wind could touch the house. For one suspended second, nobody spoke. The piano in the next room kept playing. Rain touched the windows. Evelyn Moretti did not flinch. She only turned her head slightly and looked at Claire with the composed curiosity of a woman who understood more than she ever said. Across from them, the guest who had crossed the line tried to smile as though the moment could still be laughed away, but the room had already shifted. Claire released her gently, straightened the cuff of her uniform, and lowered her eyes again, as if all she had done was rescue a falling glass. Then she spoke in a voice so soft it made everyone lean in. "You should leave now." No one moved at first. The woman across from Claire still wore the kind of smile people used when they believed money could soften disgrace. But it was fading now, slipping at the edges as the silence in the room grew heavier. Around them, crystal caught the candlelight, and every face turned carefully blank, because in houses like this, people survive by pretending not to witness the exact moment power changed hands. Claire stood with her shoulders relaxed, her expression unreadable, one hand resting at her side, the other still near the silver tray she had set down without a sound. She did not look like a threat. She looked like discipline wrapped in black and white. Evelyn Moretti studied her for a second longer, then reached for the glass of water beside her chair and took a slow sip, as if the interruption had been no more serious than a draft near an open door. That calm, more than anything, unsettled the guests, because it suggested this was not panic. It was recognition. Near the back of the room, one of the newer servers glanced toward the front entrance, too quickly, too nervously. Claire saw it in the reflection of a gilt-framed mirror and understood what the others did not. The woman in front of her was never the real danger. She was only the signal. Claire did not turn toward the mirror again, but she no longer needed to. The pattern had already revealed itself. The nervous server near the entrance was not carrying champagne the way trained staff did. His tray sat too high, his shoulders too rigid, and his eyes kept drifting to the hallway that led to the private study, the one room in the house where family records, guest ledgers, and old promises were kept behind a walnut door. This was never about a single insult in a crowded room. It was about distraction, timing, and the confidence of people who thought the evening had already been measured to the inch. Claire bent, lifted her tray, and stepped aside just enough to clear Evelyn's path without making the gesture obvious. "Mrs. Moretti," she said softly, "would you sit by the fire?" For a moment, Evelyn did not ask why. She simply placed her glass down and moved with the same unhurried grace that had carried her through decades of men who mistook noise for strength. Across the room, the woman who had caused the scene seemed to realize too late that she had lost control of the script. Then the front doors opened against the storm. Cold air brushed through the hall, and the entire house grew still in a new way. Vincent Moretti had arrived. Vincent Moretti did not need to raise his voice. The moment he stepped inside, wet overcoat draped across one shoulder, the room seemed to remember what house it was standing in. Rain clung to the edges of his dark hair. City light followed him through the open doorway for half a breath, then disappeared as the doors closed behind him with a muffled, careful weight. He took in the scene the way men like him survived long enough to become legends. One glance at his mother by the fire, one glance at the shaken guests, one glance at the woman whose confidence had already begun to crack. Then his eyes settled on Claire. Not for long, just long enough to understand that something important had happened before he arrived, and that the quiet maid standing beside Evelyn had changed the shape of the night. "Mother," he said, crossing the room. Evelyn offered him the faintest smile. "I am perfectly fine." The answer was simple, but it was not casual. It was a message. Vincent heard it. So did Claire. Around them, conversations refused to restart. The false server near the entrance shifted his weight, searching for a door that no longer felt open. Claire lowered her gaze, but every instinct in her had sharpened. The distraction had failed, which meant the real move would come now, and from somewhere closer than before. Claire shifted half a step to the left, the kind of movement no one would remember and everyone would feel. From there, she could see the front hall, the study corridor, and the reflection of Vincent Moretti in the dark window panes beyond the fire. He was speaking quietly to his mother now, but his attention was divided with the precision of a man who had learned that danger rarely entered through the loudest door. The woman who had made the scene was no longer speaking. Her silence looked rehearsed, almost obedient, as if she were waiting for someone else to finish the evening on her behalf. Claire noticed the false server touch the edge of his tray twice with his thumb. A signal, small, fussed, meant for someone who knew to watch for it. Then came the second detail. One of the side doors near the study stood open by less than an inch, though Claire had closed it herself 10 minutes earlier. Cold air slipped through that narrow space and brushed her wrist like a warning. She set her tray onto a console table and folded a linen napkin once, neatly, buying herself a second to think. Vincent had arrived, but that did not mean the threat had ended. In houses built on power, the first distraction was rarely the last. And Claire knew with sudden certainty that whoever had planned this evening was not standing in the ballroom at all. Claire picked up the tray again and moved toward the study corridor with the quiet rhythm of someone doing exactly what she was supposed to do. That was the first rule she had learned long before this house, long before Manhattan, long before black uniforms and polished silver. The safest person in any room was often the one no one truly saw. Behind her, the ballroom remained suspended in that strange, expensive silence, where people smiled with their mouths and listened with their fear. Vincent stayed beside his mother, but Claire could feel his attention tracking the room the way a storm tracked heat. He knew the air had changed. He simply had not found the source yet. At the end of the corridor, the side door stood barely open, spilling a line of darkness across the floorboards. Claire stopped 2 feet away and listened. No footsteps, no voices, just the faint mechanical hum of the climate control, and, beneath it, the soft scrape of paper against wood. Someone was inside the study, not searching wildly, searching carefully. Her eyes lowered to the brass handle, then to the old family portrait beside the door, where Evelyn Moretti had once stood younger, smiling beside a boy who had not yet learned what power cost. Claire drew one slow breath, steadied her hand, and stepped into the dark before anyone else even knew the room had been breached. The study smelled faintly of cedar, old paper, and rain that had no business being inside. Claire let the door remain open by an inch behind her, just enough to borrow a line of light from the corridor. It was enough. Near the desk, a man in a dark catering jacket stood with a leather ledger half lifted from the drawer, frozen not by fear, but by surprise. He had expected locks, guards, alarms, perhaps even Vincent himself. He had not expected the maid. Claire did not rush him. She closed the distance with the same calm she had carried through the ballroom, then set the silver tray down on the edge of a cabinet with a soft metallic whisper that sounded far louder in the dark. "That does not belong to you," she said. The man straightened, measuring her, weighing the black dress, the white cuffs, the lowered voice. For a second, he made the common mistake of thinking gentleness meant weakness. Then Claire reached to the desk, lifted a small brass letter opener, and placed it between them, not as a threat, but as a line. "Put the ledger back," she said, each word clean and even. In the hallway beyond, footsteps approached at last. Vincent had seen the empty corridor, and now he was coming to the one room where Claire had already changed the ending again. Vincent stopped at the threshold and took in the room in one silent sweep. The intruder by the desk, the family ledger returned to the drawer, the silver tray resting on the cabinet, and Claire Whitmore standing between disorder and consequence as if she had been placed there years before this night began. For a moment, no one spoke. Rain pressed softly against the windows. The old clock above the shelves marked the seconds with the patient sound of a house that had seen secrets survive longer than men. Then the intruder lowered his eyes, set both hands where they could be seen, and stepped back from the desk without argument. Claire did not look at Vincent when he entered. She only reached forward, closed the drawer, and smoothed the front of her apron as though finishing the smallest task on a very long list. It was Evelyn who appeared next, calm as candlelight, her gaze resting not on the frightened man, but on Claire. Something unspoken passed between them, something older than the evening, and quieter than gratitude. Vincent finally turned to the woman who had saved his mother's dignity, his house, and perhaps far more than that. His voice was low when he asked, "Who trained you?" Claire met his eyes at last, and in that silence, even power had to wait.